Hello guys, welcome to my channel. This is going to be a quick session in which we are going to answer the question, how do you avoid scope creep? I got this question in my comments, so I really appreciate anyone who comments and anybody who wants more to know more about the topics and wants to know more about the questions. So the question is, how do you avoid scope creep? First of all, let's address what is scope and what is scope creep. So scope is any amount of work that is being put out of the product backlog into the user stories format and into the backlog, that is sprint backlog, that the team is working on. It can be in the form of a spike, it can be in the form of user story as well. That is what is scope. The amount of work, the type of work, the work that the team is working on, the sprint backlog that the team is working on, that sprint backlog gets the work in that sprint backlog is called scope. What is scope creep? So scope creep is a situation where the product owner or the stakeholders or the clients or whatever, business analysts, they come in with new requirements, with new work items that either they want to add to the previous sprint backlog, or they want to replace the work in the sprint backlog with this new item, with this new work items. It can be a spike, a story, or it can be a user story. Okay, so that is what a scope creep is. Basically the addition of new work items to an already existing sprint backlog that the team is already working on. That is what is called a scope creep. Now, who does this? It can be the product owner, the BA, the client, the stakeholders. Okay, and if you are in a release train, it can be the product management team, and so on and so forth. Now, how do you avoid scope creep? First of all, if a sprint is already working and a sprint is already going on, to increase the scope creep, to bring more work in, it distracts the team, it affects the goal, it affects the development process, it affects the quality of the product that the team is building. Okay, so it can have a lot of negative effects to continuously having a scope creep, but it does happen in organizations. So how do you avoid it? Um, so the thing is, if you are working in a release train and if there is a requirement that is urgent, that needs to be done, the client wants it done, and he doesn't want the previous requirements, he wants to make some changes in the requirement, then as a scrum master, you have to be considerate, you have to be empathetic to the business side of people and to the product owner, and you have to let it happen. But you do have to keep the capacity of the team in mind. You do have to keep the so-called the amount of story points the team is, amount of hours that a team works and all that. You have to keep the capacity in mind, and you don't have to overcome it. Okay, something is coming in that's more important, take out something that's less important and replace it with something that's more important. So you do have to keep that in mind. It can sometimes it can be important to have scope creep. Okay, so keep that situation in mind. Now, in the situations where it's happening over and over and over again, so that means the product backlog is not healthy. That means something is not right. So you have to analyze that situation. What is the reason? Why is it happening over and over? Is the product backlog not healthy? Is the product backlog, when they're converting into sprint backlog, that is not being done properly? So what is the reason that this scope creeping is happening over and over? Sometimes it can be difficult stakeholders as well. So you have to analyze the reason. Why is this happening? Once you analyze the reason, you work with your product owner. Okay, because that is the main points, mostly where the scope creep is going to come from. So you work with your product owner and you discuss. Okay, you bring up your pain points. This is affecting the team in a negative way. Okay, the team is the quality of the work the team is doing gets affected, the team gets distracted, and so on and so forth, and it takes time out of the team's schedule. So you communicate those points to the product owner, you explain your pain points, plus you understand their pain points as well, the business side's pain points as well. Why are they doing it? There must be a reason for it. Why is it happening? So you understand their pain points and you understand why they are doing this. Okay, once you analyze that situation and you see that it is not right what is happening, and it's not important, but still they are doing it because they don't want to work on the product backlog, the product owner is not technical and he doesn't know how to handle some of the stories and all that, you realize the reasons why this is happening. So what you do is, if you have not already done so, build up a working agreement with the product owner. What is a working agreement? Working agreement is something like a contract. It's not like a like a legal contract, but it is like a formal contract. Okay, like acceptance criteria. For example, acceptance criteria is a contract between the product owner and the team. So same way, you build up a working agreement with the product owner, you build up a working agreement with the team. What that working agreement stays is, it's basically lays out a framework of what the team can expect from you, what you can expect from the team, what the team can expect from the product owner, what the product owner can expect from the team, what you can expect from the product owner, and what the product owner can expect from you. Okay, once you have that working agreement, you mention in that working agreement, okay, if there is any scope creep, it has to be taken into consideration. It shouldn't happen over and over, and so on and so forth. If you want to discuss anything with the team, you come through me. You don't go directly to the team members. Don't put them off work and all that. Those kind of things you can discuss in your working agreement. Now, that is one way to deal with it. You discuss it with the product owner, bring it up in the working agreement that, okay, this is not professional and this shouldn't happen. Now, if it does happen after that, then you have a working agreement. You keep those lines of communication open with the product owner. And you have to make sure that you keep the development team involved, because the development team is the one that has to do the work. Scrum Master is not the one that has to do the work, right? Development team is the actual team that's delivering the value. Scrum Master is the facilitator to make sure that value gets delivered. If there are impediments or blockers, to work with the governance center of excellence and things like that, right? So you make sure that a development team gets involved. They make the decision. Do they want the scope creep to happen, or do they not want the scope creep to happen? So bring it up with the development team, facilitate a discussion between the development team and the product owner of what we can do in this situation, and let the development team speak for themselves. Let them make the decision. You just facilitate the meeting. And you also make sure to bring up the pain points of how it's affecting the team and so on. And you also make sure that the side of the product owner is also heard, because at the end of the day, product owner, BA, business analyst, these are also part of the team, right? They make up the team. Without them, there is no backlog refinement. The stakeholders will be with on the head of the Scrum Master, so they are very important parts of the team. So that is how you avoid scope creep. Understand the source where it's coming from, why it's happening, and then tackle it in those ways. Okay, now moving on to the next question. How do you manage dependency within teams? So when you are working in a Scrum environment, or in a safe environment, or in an agile environment, the thing is, you're working with multiple teams. If it's not a safe environment, you're working with less than you're working with almost 5 to 12 teams. If it's a safe environment, you're working with a lot of teams, a lot of resources, a lot of people in the train. So there is always dependency. No matter what sprint you are doing, what story there is always dependency. It can be the infrastructure dependency, it can be security dependency, it can be architectural dependency. There are always dependency, okay, and no matter what you do. So how do you manage them? Okay, now if there are dependencies related to infrastructure stories or infrastructure enablers or things like that, you reach out to the Scrum Master of those particular teams. If they have a Scrum Master, you reach out to those Scrum Master, and you make sure that your point is heard. In Jira board, there are features where you can connect your dependencies to the other team's sprint, and until your dependencies are resolved, their sprint doesn't get over. So that is also one way to do it. But if that doesn't happen, then reach out to the Scrum Master of the team, and explain your pain points, quantify your pain points. Sometimes what happens is the Scrum Master of those teams are busy on their own sprints. They don't want to worry about your dependencies. So in a release train, it's very easy because everything is brought on top. In a release train, all the teams, they work together, they have a common product vision and product roadmap, and it's easier. In a release train, it becomes easier. But in a not safe environment, it gets a little tricky. So if you have a Scrum of Scrum happening, you bring it in the Scrum of Scrum. Hey, we are facing this dependency with this team, and let's get it resolved. Let's work together. Let's get it resolved. If it's not, then communicate with the Scrum Master of that team, bring it up, and make sure they know that you are having dependencies from that team. That is how you manage dependencies within team. Basically, keeping those lines of communication open with your fellow Scrum Masters. Generally, what happens is there are Slack groups or there are WhatsApp groups in different organizations for Scrum Masters, where all the Scrum Masters, they gather together and they chat and do this and that. And if you face any issues, if you face any conflicts with other Scrum Masters who don't want to finish your dependencies, who don't want to work on your dependencies because they're working on something else and so on and so forth, then you bring it up in the chat room. You bring it up with your senior Scrum Masters and ask them, hey, how should I go about the situation? Okay. You can quantify the pain that you're facing. Okay, if we don't do this, this is what we are facing. Our sprint will not be over. Our sprint will be stretched to 3 weeks, 4 weeks. If it's 2 week sprint, and if it's a 3 week sprint, our sprint will be spread to 4 weeks. We will not be able to meet the goal. The company will suffer as a whole. If you're working on a separate project, then communicating also those pain points, getting senior people involved. Generally, not getting senior people involved until it's ultimately necessary, but getting senior people involved if it's not working out, taking advice from your fellow Scrum Masters how to go about it. Just those are some of the ways that you can go about it. One time, I'm going to give you a real time scenario. I had a conflict with a fellow Scrum Master who wasn't willing to work with my dependencies. My dependencies were related to his team. He was working on a support team. So my dependencies were related to his team, and my sprint wouldn't be over. Our sprint wouldn't be over unless they work on my dependency. But they had already worked on that sprint previously, and their previous sprint, they had to work on their dependency, but they did not do that. They replaced it with a different user story. So my work was waiting on them, but they were already in a different sprint and they didn't want to work on my dependency. They didn't want to create a scope creep. So how I reached out to the Scrum Master, and he felt like I came in too strong, and he didn't want to work with me, and he didn't want to work on the dependency. So in that situation, what I did was, um, so we were getting late, and we had to reach our sprint goals as well. So in that situation, what I did was I brought it up to the senior Scrum Masters in the chat, in a Slack chat. And I asked them, hey, what would you do in this situation? How should I go about it? I'm facing this problem. And they suggested, they reached out to the other Scrum Master. They suggested, they came together, and we were able to solve the problem, and we were able to resolve it. I was able to quantify my pains and gains, and the other Scrum Master understood. That is how I resolved it in that situation. But even that doesn't work out. But if that doesn't work out, then it's better to reach out to to the senior management people of your team, and make sure that the dependency get resolved before start of every sprint. You have to lay out the dependencies and the risks, and then work on them before starting any sprint. Before you start working, before you start doing anything, make sure you lay out the dependencies and the risks of your team, and then work on them. So that is my answer to these two questions. If you like it, please like and subscribe to the channel. And thank you for watching. And I will see you in the next one.